It was past midnight in the heart of the city when Princeton Henry leaned against the balcony of his penthouse. He was not alone. A woman in a sparkling red dress stood at his side. He offered her a glass of champagne, then spoke in a calm yet chilling tone. "I'm a millionaire CEO," he said, tapping the edge of the glass with his finger. "I'll be with you tonight, but don't be jealous if I have children with other women." He gave a short laugh, as if this were the most normal thing in the world. The woman's face fell, but she forced a smile and tried to hold his gaze. All the while, Princeton stared at the city lights with an empty look. It was a look that suggested wealth could buy almost anything, yet it had never been enough to warm his heart. That night, Princeton's words haunted him in a strange way. Even as he prided himself on being powerful and free from any real commitment, a quiet unease began to stir within him. He had always told himself that he had no reason to regret anything. He believed he was free to do whatever he wanted. He told himself that love was just a game and that real relationships only led to heartbreak. But beneath the surface of his easy smiles, there was a restlessness he could not name. Princeton Henry did not start off as a cold man. In fact, when he was younger, he had big dreams and a bright spirit. He worked hard in college, developing a small software tool that eventually turned into a huge tech company called Silverlink. Overnight, he went from a simple life to one of private jets, parties, and celebrity friends. At first, he thought this was his dream come true. Yet as the years went by, something inside him seemed to fade. Instead of genuine joy, he felt only the rush of constant deals and the fleeting thrill of each new conquest, whether in business or in relationships. By the time he turned 35, Princeton was known as one of the most influential CEOs in the country. The media loved him. His board members respected him. But the people who worked the shadows of his empire, such as the cleaning staff, the interns, and the security guards, rarely saw him smile or share a kind word. He lived in the tallest penthouse in the city, went through countless affairs, and avoided commitments like the plague. He had long told himself that caring too much would be a sign of weakness. This mindset formed the walls around his heart. One night, Princeton was invited to a charity gala held at an upscale hotel. It was a typical gathering for the wealthy. Lavish decorations, extravagant dresses, and a polished host guiding the event. Princeton showed up out of obligation. He usually found these events dull, full of speeches about helping the poor or supporting some random cause. Often, he would write a generous check, pass it off as a good deed, and head home. Tonight, he thought, would be no different. He wandered through the crowd with a glass of expensive wine in his hand. As he made polite small talk, he noticed a woman standing on the stage. She wore a modest black dress, her posture was straight, and her eyes were fierce. She was introduced as Sarah Olive. Princeton had never heard of her before, and he did not expect much from her speech. Yet the moment she began to speak, something shifted in the room. Sarah talked about Women's Haven, a shelter she founded for women in crisis. She refused to sugarcoat anything. She spoke about domestic abuse, poverty, and the harsh realities that many women in the city faced each day. Her voice did not waver. She did not beg the crowd for pity or simple donations. Instead, she challenged them, stating that real change demanded more than just writing checks. She urged the people with power to create opportunities, pass better workplace policies, and address the root causes of why women ended up at shelters in the first place. Princeton found himself leaning forward, caught up in her words. A hush fell over the crowd, and a few people looked uncomfortable. After all, they were used to being praised for their wealth, not questioned about how they used it. But Sarah did not flinch. She looked around the ballroom and asked the attendees to see beyond their own comfort. She asked them to walk a mile in the shoes of someone who had nothing. When her speech ended, a polite applause rippled through the audience. Princeton, however, found his hands coming together more strongly than he expected. He felt a stirring inside him, one that he could not identify at first. He kept thinking about her words for the rest of the night. He left the gala without introducing himself, though, a bit unsettled by the effect her speech had on him. That same night, He stood on his penthouse balcony again, but his usual smug grin was replaced by a puzzled frown. The next day, Princeton could not get Sarah's words out of his mind. He remembered the quiet determination in her eyes. It was unlike anything he had seen at those fancy events. He called up a friend who worked in the charity sector and asked for an introduction. The friend arranged a meeting at Sarah's small office, which was part of the Women's Haven compound. When Princeton arrived, he was uncomfortable. He was dressed in a designer suit, stepping into a space that smelled of stale coffee and cleaning supplies. The walls were lined with hand-drawn posters that read things like "Hope lives here," and "Your past does not define you." Sarah was sitting at a desk, typing on an old computer. When she saw him, she stood up, her eyes reflecting the same fierce determination he recalled from a gala. He introduced himself, stumbling over his words. It was rare for him to feel off balance, yet something about her made him nervous. Her posture was straight, her handshake firm. "I heard your speech last night," Princeton said quietly. I wanted to learn more about your work." "About the shelter." Sarah nodded. "I'm glad. Most people only hear it but don't really listen." "Which one are you, Mr. Henry?" He hesitated. "I'd like to think I listened," he finally replied. "I want to see if I can do something meaningful. Not just a donation. Maybe more." She studied him for a moment. "We need structural help. We need people who can create real changes in the system. If you're willing to learn, I'll show you the shelter." Her tone was polite yet guarded, as if she had been disappointed by wealthy promises before. Princeton nodded. "Please show me." She led him through a narrow hallway, where the paint was peeling and the floorboards creaked under their feet. They passed a kitchen where volunteers prepared meals. In a small day room, a group of women chatted quietly over cups of tea. A few toddlers played with worn-out toys in a corner. Princeton felt the weight of their eyes upon him. He had never been in a place like this before, so raw, so honest. He noticed the exhaustion on the women's faces, along with a thin layer of hope that clung to them. Sarah explained the daily struggles at the shelter. They were always short on funds. Many women came in with only the clothes on their backs, escaping dire situations at home. Some had children who needed medical care or schooling. Others were fighting legal battles. The shelter did its best to help, but resources were stretched thin. Sarah spoke calmly about all of this, but Princeton could see a hint of sadness in her face. She cared deeply about the women under her care. At one point, Princeton's phone rang. It was an investor calling from overseas. In his old life, he would have answered without a second thought. But now he stared at the phone, then declined the call. For reasons he could not fully explain, it felt wrong to talk about stock options while standing in the middle of the shelter. Sarah watched him from the corner of her eye and gave a small nod of approval. They ended the tour in a small courtyard behind the main building. There were a few benches and a struggling garden plot. Sarah turned to Princeton, looking him straight in the eye. "So, Mr. Henry," she said, "are you still interested in helping?" He took a moment before replying. "Yes," he said slowly. "I want to do something real. Something that will help these women for the long run." She studied him again, then said, "If you really want to help, spend a week here. Live in our shelter, not in a fancy hotel. Get to know the women. See their world from the inside." Princeton swallowed hard. Part of him wanted to say no, to run back to his penthouse and forget all this. But a stronger part of him felt pulled toward the truth in her challenge. "All right," he said at last. "I'll do it." Sarah gave a small, approving smile. "Good. Pack light." Princeton arrived at the shelter the following Monday morning with a single duffel bag. He had told his board he would be taking a short leave for personal reasons. Most of them had raised eyebrows, but he did not offer details. He left behind his world of marble floors, glass elevators, and personal drivers. Instead, he stepped into a small bedroom with chipped paint and a creaky bed. He could hear crying from the next room over, and from somewhere outside, the loud sound of traffic drifted in through a cracked window. On his first day, Princeton mostly observed. He watched how volunteers served meals and helped women fill out job applications. He stood quietly as Sarah handled a tense situation between two residents arguing over missing items. He learned that many of the women had faced unimaginable hardships: physical abuse, homelessness, and betrayal by people they once trusted. Their stories left him raw and unsettled. By the second day, Sarah asked him to help serve lunch in the kitchen. At first, he fumbled with the ladle, feeling out of place. The women eyed him curiously, some with suspicion, others with amusement. A few recognized him from news articles. One woman, older and sharp-tongued, asked him, "So, big shot CEO, how's it feel to stand in a soup line?" He froze for a moment, then forced a laugh. "It's humbling," he said simply. She gave a sniff and turned away, not fully satisfied with his answer. Still, as the days passed, Princeton began to build small bridges. He chatted with a young mother who had fled an abusive husband. He helped a grandmother carry a load of laundry. He stayed up late one night comforting a woman who had nightmares from past traumas. Each conversation peeled away another layer of his old life, and he began to see people, not projects. He started to understand that for these women, every day was a fight for survival and dignity. The nights were the hardest for Princeton. Gone was his king-size bed with silk sheets. In its place was a twin bed with a thin mattress. He would lie there, staring at the ceiling, hearing the muffled sobs or restless footsteps in the hallway. The old him would have shrugged off these problems, saying it was not his responsibility. But now he could not escape. He was part of it. Every morning, he woke up early to help in the kitchen. He shared coffee with the women, listened to their stories, and realized how little he actually knew about the world beyond his own circle. On the fourth day, he learned about a young woman named Karina, who had come to the shelter after losing her job and being kicked out of her apartment. She was terrified she might lose custody of her son because she had nowhere else to go. Princeton listened as she explained how job applications often asked for a home address, which she did not have. He heard her frustration that employers seemed reluctant to hire someone living in a shelter. That day, Princeton felt a burning need to use his influence to fix this problem. He pulled Sarah aside after lunch. "I have an idea," he said. "My company has several training programs. We usually hire interns from top universities. But what if we create a pilot program for women at the shelter? We can teach them basic tech skills, help them build resumes, and maybe even offer job placements at Silverlink or partner companies." Sarah paused, considering. "It's a big step," she said, "but a good one. If done right, it can give them the chance they deserve." Her eyes sparkled with a hint of hope. For the first time, Princeton felt like he was working on something that could change lives in a direct way, not just deliver good public relations. When Princeton's week at the shelter came to an end, he realized he was in no rush to leave. The experience had broken him down in unexpected ways, yet it also made him feel alive. On his last evening, he found himself in the courtyard, where Sarah was busy watering the struggling garden. The sun was setting, painting the sky with soft shades of orange and pink. "I want to keep coming back," Princeton said. He was not sure why his voice sounded shaky. "I don't want this to be a one-time act of kindness." Sarah turned off the hose and looked at him. "I'm glad," she said softly. Then she gave a gentle smile. "It's rare to see someone with your resources actually commit to long-term change." Princeton took a slow breath. "Sarah," he said, I want to thank you. Your speech at the gala woke me up. I was so focused on myself that I forgot what it means to live, to care, to see beyond my own world." She nodded, her expression warm. "Well, sometimes all it takes is the right push." They shared a quiet moment, the noises of the shelter and the city fading into the background. In that moment, Princeton felt more honest, more real than he ever had before. In the weeks that followed, Princeton threw himself into creating real solutions for Women's Haven. He worked with his board to form a formal partnership offering job training programs, daycare support, and mental health counseling funds. He asked his legal team to help the shelter residents with their paperwork. He even convinced a few board members to come visit the shelter themselves. It was no longer just about writing checks for charity events. He wanted to tackle the problems at their roots. The media caught wind of his sudden change. Some headlines praised him as a visionary, while others accused him of doing it for good PR. Princeton did not care about the gossip. He was too busy meeting with the women at the shelter and refining the programs to meet their needs. He let Sarah guide him, trusting her experience and passion. During this time, a bond formed between him and Sarah. They spent hours discussing ways to improve Women's Haven. Sometimes they disagreed on details. Sarah wanted to proceed slowly and carefully, ensuring that each resident's voice was heard. Princeton wanted to move quickly, using his power to force immediate changes. But their arguments always ended in respect, each learning from the other. Gradually, their partnership deepened into friendship and beyond. One evening, after a long meeting, Princeton walked Sarah home. She lived in a modest apartment near the shelter. Under the soft glow of a street lamp, he confessed his growing feelings. "I know we come from different worlds," he said quietly, "but I can't ignore how much I admire you." Sarah hesitated. "We do come from different worlds," she said gently. "And this work is so important. I don't want us to lose sight of it." Princeton nodded. "We won't. But I also don't want to pretend we don't have this connection." She looked at him, seeing the sincerity in his eyes. "I feel it too," she finally admitted. "But you have to understand, I've seen too many people make promises they can't keep." Princeton took her hand, holding it softly. "I promise you," he said, his voice trembling a little. "I'm in this for the long haul." They began dating, but it was unlike any relationship Princeton had before. There were no flashy gifts or grand gestures for the sake of showing off. Instead, they built their connection on quiet dinners where they talked about the future of Women's Haven, or about the women who still needed so much help. Princeton found himself sharing pieces of his past that he had never revealed to anyone else. He felt safe with Sarah, and in turn, she opened up about her own struggles and doubts. Slowly, the walls around Princeton's heart began to crumble. He realized how empty his old lifestyle had been. The shallow affairs, the empty nights, the comment about not being jealous if he had children with other women. It all seemed like a distant echo of a life he no longer recognized. Now he was learning how to care, how to be present for someone else, how to become part of something bigger than himself. As their bond grew, so did the impact they made together. Women's Haven expanded its facilities with the help of new investments and better policies at Silverlink. The pilot program for job training became a success, with several women finding stable employment. The once struggling courtyard garden bloomed with bright flowers, a symbol of the hope taking root there. Not everyone in Princeton's life approved of the changes. Some board members complained that he was spending too much time on charity. A few wealthy friends teased him about going soft. Yet for every person who scoffed at his new path, there were more who supported it. Even employees at Silverlink felt proud to work for a company that cared about social issues. And the women at the shelter finally saw a true ally in someone who once seemed so distant. Months turned into a year. Princeton and Sarah continued to grow closer, facing challenges together and celebrating successes. One evening, as they walked through the shelter's hallway, Princeton saw a child proudly wearing a t-shirt from the new job training program. The boy waved at him, beaming. Princeton felt tears prick his eyes. He realized how far he had come from the man who once bragged about his affairs and wealth on a penthouse balcony. That night, he took Sarah to the courtyard. It was late, and most people were asleep. The moonlight lit up the small space, casting shadows on the benches. A gentle breeze carried the scent of flowers. Princeton turned to Sarah, taking both her hands in his. "I need to tell you something," he said. His heart pounded as he got down on one knee. "Sarah Olive, you changed my life. You showed me what it means to care, to fight for real change, to see people for who they are, not what they can give me. You taught me how to love. Will you marry me?" Sarah's eyes filled with tears. For a moment, she did not speak, her hand covering her mouth. Then she dropped to her knees beside him, throwing her arms around his neck. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will." They held each other in the courtyard, the sound of the city in the background, the shelter's lights glowing softly behind them. In that embrace, both felt a sense of wholeness they had never known before. Preparations for the wedding were both exciting and challenging. Sarah insisted on a simple ceremony, wanting to focus on the commitment rather than the spectacle. Princeton agreed, though his wealthy parents were a bit confused by the lack of grandeur. The venue was set, the courtyard at Women's Haven, the place where so many of their shared memories had taken root. On the morning of the wedding, the shelter buzzed with excitement. Volunteers hung handmade decorations, and the women helped arrange chairs for the guests. Children raced around, giggling. Even the air felt different, lighter, filled with hope. Princeton stood at the makeshift altar, wearing a crisp suit but feeling more nervous than he had ever felt before. He glanced around at the small crowd. There were friends from the business world, but also many of the shelter's residents. Some he had met during his week-long stay. Others had arrived more recently. They all wore big smiles, looking at him with a mixture of gratitude and love. The music began to play, and Sarah appeared at the end of the aisle. She wore a simple white dress, a small bouquet of wildflowers in her hands. She had never looked more beautiful to Princeton. As she walked toward him, the world seemed to slow down. He thought of the night she gave that fearless speech at the gala, the many evenings they spent planning improvements to Women's Haven, and the day she challenged him to live among the shelter's residents. Each memory reminded him of how much he had changed. The old Princeton was gone, replaced by a man who felt every emotion fiercely. Just as the officiant cleared his throat to begin, a slight commotion arose at the back of the courtyard. A woman, breathless and shaking, stumbled in. Her clothes were torn, and fear filled her eyes. One of the volunteers rushed to her, and the crowd parted. Sarah and Princeton exchanged a worried glance. This was not part of any plan. Yet, in that moment, they both understood that their work was never truly done. Sarah hurried over, placing a comforting arm around the woman. "It's all right," she said softly. "You're safe here. Nobody will hurt you." Princeton signaled to the volunteers to help the woman inside, offering immediate aid. A hush fell over the guests, who realized that even on this day of celebration, life at the shelter went on. Pain and crisis would always come knocking. But this time, there were people ready to help. There was a place of refuge. After making sure the woman was in caring hands, Sarah returned to the aisle. She exchanged a look with Princeton that held both sorrow and determination. Then, with that same fearless strength, she walked back to the altar. The officiant began the ceremony, speaking words about love, partnership, and the vow to stand by each other in both joy and hardship. Princeton's voice shook when he repeated his vows. He promised to love, honor, and respect Sarah. He promised to uphold the values she had brought into his life, the fight for justice, the call for compassion, and the courage to stand up for those who had no voice. Sarah's eyes glistened with tears as she made her vows, promising to love Princeton for who he was now, as well as the man he was still becoming. When they were pronounced husband and wife, the courtyard erupted in cheers. The women from the shelter clapped loudly, some of them crying, as they saw how hope could blossom even in the most unexpected places. The children giggled and tossed flower petals. Princeton and Sarah kissed under the sun's golden rays, sealing not just their love for each other, but their commitment to a shared life of making a difference. That evening, after the celebration died down, Princeton and Sarah stood alone in the courtyard. Twilight had painted the sky in deep blues and purples. They gazed at the small lights strung between the trees, their hands clasped together. "You know," Princeton said softly, remembering his old self, "there was a time when I was proud to say, 'I'm a millionaire CEO. I'll be with you tonight, but don't be jealous if I have children with other women.' I can't believe I was that person." Sarah squeezed his hand, her eyes warm and comforting. "You were lost," she said, "but you found your way back. And now we start this new chapter together." A quiet smile spread across Princeton's face. He recalled how he used to think happiness was measured by money and fleeting affairs. Yet here he was, feeling happier than he had ever been. The shelter, once just a run-down place he had visited out of curiosity, had become the place where he rediscovered his soul. The woman before him, once just a brave voice at a gala, was now his partner for life. They stood there side by side, as a gentle breeze rustled the newly bloomed flowers. The city's lights sparkled in the distance, a reminder of the world they hoped to change. In that moment, Princeton felt a sense of peace he never thought possible. He was no longer driven by selfish desires. Instead, he was guided by love, purpose, and the unshakable belief that hope could rise in the darkest corners. And so, with the echoes of laughter still lingering in the air, they looked toward tomorrow. There was more work to be done, more women to help, more systems to change. But they were ready. They knew that together, they could build a community of hope and second chances. As Princeton wrapped his arms around Sarah, he whispered a silent thanks for the journey that had led him here. He was no longer just a millionaire CEO. He was a man who had learned how to live, how to love, and how to fight for something far greater than himself. "I will be with you for 2 nights. If you do not touch me, I will marry you," she said. She stared at him with eyes that held a strange mix of defiance, desire, and fear. In that moment, her voice trembled just enough to reveal how much this deal meant to her. The room was silent, yet it felt like a violent storm was howling around them. Her face was pale, and the billionaire CEO sat before her, arms crossed, his proud chin tilted up. He did not speak right away. Instead, he watched her as if she were a puzzle he needed to solve. He was used to winning. He was used to women yielding to him. This situation was not normal, and the tension in the space could be touched if anyone dared to stretch out a trembling hand. He was Alexander Pierce, a man so wealthy that his name caused chills to run down people's spines. He had conquered business empires and taken over top firms with single phone calls. Women came to him in droves, drawn to his wealth, style, and confidence. All he had to do was wink, and they fell into his arms. Now, in front of him stood a woman who did not seem impressed by his status. She did not simper. She did not beg. Instead, she made him an offer that he could not fully comprehend. 2 nights alone, and if he managed not to touch her, she would agree to be his wife. It sounded like a trick. It sounded twisted, like something out of a bizarre dream. Alexander, the proud womanizer, was suddenly at a loss. He considered his usual ways, the flirtation, the arrogance, the smooth grin that could melt glaciers. But he sensed this was different from anything he had ever known. Still, he wanted to prove he could conquer her challenge. He wanted to show her that he would not lose. His entire life had been about winning, about controlling situations, about controlling people. Now, she wanted to control him by making a strange bet that targeted both his pride and his deepest nature. She called herself Ava Monroe. She had the aura of someone who had battled storms. Her eyes glowed with both innocence and cunning. She was soft-spoken yet strong. Her lips trembled, but her posture stayed upright. She did not waver under his cool stare. If anything, she appeared more determined than he had expected any woman to be when facing him. This was the first time he found himself uncertain. She repeated the words one more time for clarity. "I will be with you for 2 nights. If you do not touch me, I will marry you." Then she slipped a small key onto the table, turned around, and walked out with quiet footsteps that echoed louder in Alexander's mind than any thousand roars. That was the beginning of the most unsettling deal of Alexander's life. He did not know what to make of it. He was both excited and irritated. He was not a man who let others dictate the terms of anything. Yet here he was, cornered by a simple request. He was sure he could resist her, but he also felt the sting of her confidence. She sounded certain that he would fail. She believed he would not be able to keep his hands to himself for a mere 2 nights. That was all. 2 nights of self-control, or he would lose her forever. Alexander did not realize it yet, but from that moment on, his life would never be the same. Alexander owned a luxurious penthouse suite in the heart of the city. It was perched on top of the tallest skyscraper, with floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed the glittering lights far below. He chose to meet Ava there on a Friday evening, right before midnight. The schedule was unspoken, but understood. The 2 nights would commence with that meeting. A hush had spread through the city by then. The streets below were dotted with glowing headlights, and the sky was a dark canvas of clouds. The building itself felt watchful, as though it awaited something grand. He told his staff to remain on standby and not disturb him unless there was an emergency. He did not want any guests. He did not want any phone calls. This weekend belonged to a woman named Ava. He planned to show her that he was not as weak as she believed. He stood by the window, arms folded behind his back, thinking about everything that led to this bizarre agreement. She would step out of that elevator soon, would stand in his penthouse, and he would keep his distance. He pictured her face, and he felt a flicker of warmth in his chest. He felt excitement, too, but he forced it down. At precisely midnight, the elevator chimed. Alexander turned around, straightening his shoulders. The doors slid open, and Ava emerged. She wore a flowing black dress that accentuated her figure without being obvious. Her long hair was swept behind one shoulder. She exuded calm confidence, but he guessed there was a swirl of emotions beneath her composed surface. She took a moment to look around. She was not overawed by the splendor of his penthouse, with its marble floors and expensive artwork. She walked in as though she had expected nothing less. "Mr. Pierce," she said in a quiet but steady voice. He motioned for her to come closer. The space between them was wide, but it felt heavy with unspoken tension. They looked at each other, two strong minds trying to maintain power. "Welcome," he said, voice even. "Would you like something to drink?" She nodded. She slipped off her coat and placed it on the back of a chair. Alexander could not help but notice the smooth arch of her neck. He took a quick, almost invisible breath and reminded himself not to succumb to her. Even if she was beautiful, he was stronger than a passing desire. At least, that was what he kept telling himself. He went to the bar and poured them each a glass of red wine. She sat down, crossing her legs, and took the glass he offered. She smelled like lilies and roses, a subtle blend that was both gentle and tempting. He sat across from her, trying to keep his distance. The first night had begun. "Let's talk," Ava said. Her voice was calm, but Alexander could tell there was something hidden there, a cool determination underneath that polite tone. "Talk about what?" he asked, his gaze sliding over her, then darting back to his glass. "Everything and nothing," she said. "We have 2 nights. We might as well learn more about each other." "Is that part of the challenge?" he asked with a raised eyebrow. She smiled slightly. "Think of it as part of the courtship. If you can resist me, and I learn that you're strong and genuine, I'll keep my word. I'll marry you. But I will also see what lies beneath your smooth words and your money. You have a reputation, Mr. Pierce. People say you do not respect any woman beyond a fleeting interest. I want to see if that is true." Alexander smirked. "And you? Who are you behind that quiet facade? You come into my life with a strange offer. You hardly know me, yet you are so sure I will fail. You plan to tempt me, do you not?" Ava looked at him, her eyes unwavering. "Yes, I plan to tempt you. I'll use all that I have. And we both know you want me to do it." He took a sip of wine to hide the faint tremor in his jaw. "I appreciate honesty. Let me be honest as well. I do want you to try. I want to prove that I'm in control. Because I am. Always." She leaned back on the couch, letting her hair spill down her shoulder. She took a slow sip of her own wine, eyes never leaving his face. "Then let the fun begin," she whispered. They talked for an hour. Simple, polite conversation flowed between them, peppered with moments of tension whenever Ava shifted her posture or ran her fingers through her hair. Her every movement seemed carefully chosen. She never did anything too obvious. There was no blatant invitation. Instead, she would occasionally reach over for her glass, letting her sleeve slip a bit to reveal a smooth, tempting piece of skin on her arm. She would lean forward, letting the dress fall open at the neckline just an inch more. She would smile with half-lidded eyes when he spoke. It was a slow, steady attack on his senses. Alexander fought to appear unbothered. In truth, each subtle gesture made him want to glance in her direction more often. He noticed how her lips parted slightly when she listened to him speak. He also noticed how she seemed to deliberately bring up topics that brought tension into the air, asking him about his childhood, his family, and all the things he did not openly discuss. She was pulling him in, making him share pieces of himself. He found it annoying and oddly thrilling. When the clock ticked close to 2 a.m., Ava finally stood. "I need to freshen up," she said, placing her empty glass on the table. She left the room, and Alexander slumped back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He reminded himself he had to keep his distance, physically and emotionally. But he kept remembering her words, "I will be with you for 2 nights. If you do not touch me, I will marry you." They echoed in his mind like a quiet drumbeat, daring him to fail. A few moments later, she returned, and his breath caught in his throat. She had undone her hair, letting it fall free. She had also taken off the formal black dress, replacing it with a satin robe in a pale rose color. It was short, ending just above her knees, and the neckline dipped low, but not so low that it was outright vulgar. It was tasteful, yet so very tempting that Alexander felt heat bloom on his skin. "I'm going to bed," she said. "Shall I assume we're sharing a room, since you want to prove you can resist me?" Alexander collected himself, trying to push the sudden rush of desire away from his voice. "I have more than one room here," he said, trying to sound aloof. "You can pick whichever you like." She offered him a playful smile. "Yes, I can. But that's not the point. If this is a real test, we should be in the same room. If you sleep in another one, you have an easy escape. This way, you'll have to be strong with me lying right there next to you." He stared at her, stunned at how bold she was. "Is that truly necessary?" She walked toward him slowly, stopping just a foot away. Alexander could smell the light floral scent again, and it made his heart thump. She looked up at him, eyes soft and inviting. "You say you want to prove yourself, yes? Then do it. Show me you are not weak. Let me lay beside you, so close you can hear my heartbeat. Let me sleep next to you with this robe, and see if you can last until morning without giving in." Alexander let out a small laugh, though it did not hide his unease. He was a man who prided himself on control, but this was a serious test. Still, he would not back down now. "Fine," he said. "But remember, I'm not going to lose." She simply raised her eyebrows in a way that suggested she had heard all of that before. Then she turned and walked to the master bedroom, hips swaying with confident grace. Alexander followed, feeling both curious and apprehensive. The master bedroom was a grand space with large windows, an expansive bed, and tasteful decor. Warm lights glowed from hidden fixtures in the ceiling. The sheets were crisp, the pillows arranged neatly. Ava approached the bed and pulled back the covers, sitting on the edge. Alexander lingered by the doorway, heart pounding. She looked at him over her shoulder. "Are you going to stand there all night?" she teased softly. He took a step forward. He reminded himself that he was a grown man and not some nervous teenager. Still, there was something about her challenge that made his nerves feel alive in ways he had not experienced before. Usually, he pursued women on his own terms. He was the one who acted confident, leading them to fall into his arms. Now, the tables were turned. She was the one controlling the pace, deciding the field of battle. With an inward shake of his head, Alexander walked over to the bed. He sat on the other side, leaving a considerable gap between them. She stretched out her long legs, crossing them, and leaned back on the pillows. The satin robe shifted, revealing the smooth line of her collarbone. Alexander forced his eyes to remain on her face. "Turn off the light, please," she said, her voice almost a whisper. He reached over to the bedside lamp and flicked it off, leaving the room in near darkness. The faint glow from the window curtains allowed just enough light to see her silhouette. He removed his shoes and jacket. Then, with controlled movements, he lay down on top of the covers. He would not slip under them. That felt too intimate. She slid under the blankets, and he heard her soft sigh as she settled in. For several minutes, neither spoke. Alexander stared at the ceiling, trying not to imagine the woman beside him. Yet he could hear her gentle breathing, and that made his heart flutter. The room felt small and warm, and her presence wrapped around him like an invisible vine. He wondered if she was smiling to herself, relishing her victory. Maybe she was certain he would fail, But, as exhausted as he felt, he held on to his self-control. He would not reach out. He would not give her the satisfaction of seeing him crack so easily. Sleep came slowly, tugging at him until his eyes closed. He drifted off with a thudding heart, uncertain about what the morning would bring. He woke up to the soft glow of dawn. The sky was tinted pink, and the city below was still waking. Alexander turned his head to look at Ava. She was asleep, breathing evenly, her lips slightly parted. She looked peaceful. The satin robe had slipped down her shoulder, revealing skin that made his pulse pound. But he did not reach for her. He rolled out of bed, rubbed his face, and went to the bathroom. A short while later, he came out, dressed in casual clothes. Ava was still asleep, so he left the room, heading for the kitchen to brew coffee. He felt a small surge of pride. He had passed the first night unscathed. But he also wondered if this was only the beginning of her attempts. Would she try harder tonight? He poured himself a cup of coffee and stood by the window, gazing out at the early morning horizon. The city stretched out as far as he could see. He thought about his life, how empty it felt, despite all his wealth. His personal relationships were shallow. He had lovers, but none who truly touched his heart. He found it was easier to remain distant. That way, he never had to risk feeling vulnerable or hurt. But Ava was different. She was forcing him to explore unknown territory. If he lost more than just the bet. He would lose his pride. If he won, he would marry a woman he barely knew. It was a gamble, but one he was strangely willing to take. Maybe it was because a part of him, deep down, wanted to see if there was something more to living than his current path. When Ava finally emerged from the bedroom, Alexander was finishing his coffee. She had changed into a light blue sundress. She did not look like someone who had tried to entice a man into breaking his control the night before. Instead, she looked like she was ready for a casual day out. He found it somewhat disarming. Her hair was brushed and loose, framing her face. She spotted him at the counter and offered him a small smile. "Good morning," she greeted. She took a seat on one of the high stools near the kitchen island. "Did you sleep well?" He nodded, setting his mug aside. "I did. You?" She shrugged lightly. "Yes, I did. I'm glad to see you kept your promise." He raised an eyebrow. "You sound almost disappointed." She laughed softly. "Let's just say I'm surprised you did not try to do anything. Most men would have tried something by now." Alexander let out a small grunt. "I'm not most men." "No, you're not," she agreed. She looked at him with an unreadable expression. "Shall we have breakfast? I noticed you have a well-stocked fridge. I can cook us something if you like." He was about to refuse, but then he realized he actually liked the idea of her cooking for him. He had private chefs for years, but never had a woman volunteer to make him a simple, homemade meal in his own kitchen. That felt odd, but also cozy. "All right," he said, keeping his voice level. "Help yourself." Ava hopped off the stool, rolling up her sleeves. She found eggs, vegetables, bread, and set about preparing breakfast. Alexander watched her from behind, occasionally offering to assist, but she seemed content to do it herself. The casual domestic scene felt so strange to him. Here he was, a billionaire known for fast cars, lavish parties, and fleeting affairs, standing in the kitchen while a woman he barely knew scrambled eggs. He shook his head, a small smile forming on his lips. Maybe he was losing his mind, but he found the sight comforting. She hummed a low tune as she cooked, a melodic sound that made him think of calm afternoons. He tried not to get lulled by the gentle mood. She was still determined to test him, after all. When they sat down to eat, the meal was simple but good. Warm toast, scrambled eggs with herbs, and a bit of roasted tomato on the side. They ate in comfortable silence at first. Then Ava spoke. "I might go out to the balcony after this," she said. "I'd like to see the city from this height. It's beautiful, isn't it?" "It is," he replied, glancing toward the windows. "You can see everything for miles." She gave him another curious look. "Do you often spend time just looking out at the city?" He hesitated. "I do sometimes. But usually I'm too busy with meetings, calls, or traveling. I don't just stand there and take in a view for fun." "That's a pity," she said softly. You have this amazing vantage point, and you don't enjoy it." He shrugged, unable to form a response. The gentle tone of her voice suggested she was reading deeper into him than he liked. He took another bite of his breakfast to avoid speaking. When they finished, Ava rose from a table and picked up their plates, washing them in the sink. Alexander looked at her, once again struck by how different she was from other women he had dated. She did not rush him to take her shopping. She did not ask about his money. She did not brag or nag. She just quietly took care of small tasks. He found it both lovely and unsettling. They spent much of the day inside. Ava borrowed a thick book from the shelf in his study, reading on the couch while he made some phone calls for work. He tried not to show any sign of interest when she stretched, or when she moved closer to him on the couch to peer at the phone screen, or when she casually brushed her hair aside to expose her neck. Each time, he caught a faint whiff of her perfume. His pulse quickened, but he held firm. In the late afternoon, she decided to test his resolve further. She asked if he wanted to watch a movie in the home theater. Alexander agreed, thinking it was harmless. But once they settled in, she dimmed the lights and chose a romantic drama, one that was filled with steamy tension and heartbreaking confessions of love. Every intimate scene seemed to highlight the closeness of two people longing for each other. Meanwhile, Ava shifted closer on the plush seat, so that their arms brushed. Alexander felt the heat of her body, and it made focusing on the movie nearly impossible. Halfway through, she leaned on his shoulder as if seeking comfort from the intense storyline. He stiffened, aware of how soft she felt. Then, at a particularly emotional moment in the film, she laid her hand on his thigh. Not too high, just enough to make him hyper-aware that her touch was there. He swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. He told himself to remain calm. She was testing him, probably waiting to see if he'd put an arm around her waist or pull her closer. But he did not move. His heart pounded in his chest, yet he kept still. He watched the screen, the flickering light reflecting off his tense features. Eventually, the scene ended and Ava pulled back. She looked up at him, eyes shining with unshed tears, maybe from a film or maybe not, and smiled in a sad sort of way. "It's just a movie," he said, trying to sound unaffected. She sniffed and let out a small laugh. "Yes, it is. But it's nice to see a love story, even if it's all pretend." He did not know what to say, so he simply nodded. Ava shut off the movie soon after that. They left the home theater, and the quiet between them felt thick with unspoken words. That evening, as the sky turned dark and the lights of the city glimmered, Ava suggested they order dinner. They sat across from each other at the elegant dining table, eating a meal delivered from a top restaurant. Candlelight flickered, casting shadows on their faces. Ava's eyes seemed deeper in that gentle glow. She asked him again about his life, his goals, and how he saw the future. He answered her questions, slowly revealing little bits about himself. He admitted he had grown up in a home where emotions were rarely shown, that his parents were mostly absent, occupied with their own business dealings. He learned from a young age that power and money were the paths to respect. Along the way, he had lost any sense of deeper feeling. Ava listened, nodding at times, never judging him. She admitted that she had her own share of heartbreak in the past. She did not talk about it too much, only enough to show that she understood pain. But Alexander sensed there was a wound in her heart, something that drove her to seek this odd arrangement with him. "I want to see if a man as strong as you can control himself," she said after a while, swirling the wine in her glass. "Many men pretend they are powerful, but they can't even resist a kiss when the moment comes. They think they rule the world, but they're actually slaves to their own desires." Her words stung him, but he swallowed his pride. "You must have met some weak men," he said, trying to maintain composure. "I'm sorry for that, but I'm not weak." Ava took a sip, eyeing him over the rim of her glass. "Yes, I can see you're not. Still, the second night has not started yet, and that's usually when people crumble." Alexander tilted his head, studying her. "Are you going to try something more drastic tonight?" She set her glass down, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Oh, you have no idea. Night 2. It was the moment that could change everything." If Alexander survived without touching Ava, he would win. If he lost, he would give in to the desire that was growing with every minute. He kept telling himself he had to win. Yet another voice in his mind asked him, why not give in? This woman is beautiful, interesting, and she's practically inviting you. But he knew that was the easy way out. Besides, the bet was no mere game. He wanted to show her that he was not just a shallow playboy. They returned to the master bedroom. This time, Ava upped the stakes. She slipped into something that made Alexander's heart thunder. A dark red, form-fitting nightgown that revealed her curves without shame. He forced his eyes not to linger, but it was impossible not to notice how the fabric hugged her hips. She walked up to him, standing very close, eyes flicking to his lips. We have all night, she whispered, lifting her hand to brush a bit of lint off his shoulder. The slight contact sent a jolt through his body. He clenched his fists at his sides. We do, he agreed, voice low. She took his hand and led him to the bed. This time, Alexander decided to change into something more comfortable. A simple t-shirt and light sweatpants. He knew if he stayed in his usual dress shirt and slacks, it might raise the tension unnecessarily. He was not trying to lose. They sat on the bed, facing each other. Ava crossed her legs, letting the nightgown slide up slightly. He tried to keep his eyes on her face, not her thighs. Let's talk again, she said in that seductive tone. Tell me something you've never told anyone. He froze. That's a big request. She tilted her head, her hair tumbling to one side. Consider it part of the test. Alexander exhaled slowly. He thought about it, then spoke. I'm lonely, he confessed. I've been surrounded by people my entire life, business partners, employees, even lovers. But I always feel like no one really sees me. They see my money, my power, my name. Not me. I've never told anyone that. Ava's expression softened. She uncrossed her legs and moved closer. She placed a hand on the side of his face, a gentle gesture that made his breath catch. That must hurt, she said softly. He wanted to lean into her hand, to let himself feel her warmth. But he held back, remembering the bet. She dropped her hand. Thank you for telling me, she whispered. You, he asked, clearing his throat. Something you've never told anyone. She hesitated, looking away. Then she closed her eyes for a moment. I once believed in a man who promised me the world, she said, her voice trembling. I gave him my trust, my body, my heart. In the end, he betrayed me. He left without a word. I felt worthless, and I swore I would never let a man control my emotions like that again. That's why I came up with this strange arrangement. I wanted to see if there was a man who could think with his heart instead of just his desires. Alexander stared at her. I'm sorry, he said quietly. He meant it. She turned back to him, tears shining in her eyes. Don't be. It's in the past. A long silence followed, filled with an unspoken understanding that passed between them. They each held scars. They each were learning about the other in a real, honest way. The tension that had once been about lust was now layered with something deeper, empathy. But Ava was not done testing him. The final hours of the second night were the hardest for Alexander. She asked him to dance with her, claiming she wanted to move to the music. Soft, slow music filled the bedroom. The lights were low. She stood in front of him, her body swaying gently, arms lifting to rest around his shoulders. Their bodies were very close. Her lips hovered near his ear, and her breath tickled his skin. He felt her chest press lightly against him. The heat was overwhelming. I love dancing like this, she murmured. Alexander swallowed. He placed his hands on her waist, trying to keep them from sliding lower. They moved together, a gentle rhythm, their hearts beating in sync. He inhaled her scent, fresh, floral, and distinctly hers. She tilted her head back to look at him. Her eyes sparkled in the dim light, and her lips parted. For a moment, it felt like the entire world had vanished, leaving only them. He knew this was the moment. If he leaned in and pressed his lips to hers, no one would blame him. It would be normal, even predictable. And, oh, how he wanted to do exactly that. Her mouth looked soft, inviting. He felt the fire burning in his veins. But he remembered the bet. If you do not touch me, I will marry you. She had said it. If he crossed the line, would she disappear from his life forever? He pulled away, breath ragged. She looked at him, a bit surprised, perhaps disappointed. She reached up, cupping his cheek. For a split second, Alexander almost gave in. He almost turned his face to kiss her palm. But he closed his eyes and took a step back. I'm sorry, he said, voice unsteady. I can't. Ava nodded, letting her hand drop. Her gaze flickered with an emotion he could not fully read. Was it respect? Sadness? Relief? She walked over to the bed, turned off the music, and then slipped under the covers. Alexander stood there, chest heaving, staring at her. The tension in the room was thick, but the clock was ticking, and soon dawn would break. He joined her in bed again, lying on top of the covers. She lay with her back to him, and he wondered if she was upset. But he could not bring himself to speak. If he opened his mouth, he might let loose all the desire he was holding back. So he lay there, listening to her breaths, the sound of his own heartbeat, and the muffled hum of city life through the windows. Slowly, he drifted into an uneasy sleep. Morning light filtered through the curtains, soft and golden. Alexander woke with a start, immediately aware of the woman beside him. She was still asleep, her breathing gentle. He felt a rush of relief and triumph. He had made it through the second night without touching her in the intimate sense. He had resisted every temptation. That meant he had won, right? As if sensing his thoughts, Ava stirred. She yawned, stretching her arms. She turned to face him, blinking her eyes to adjust to the light. Then she offered him a small smile. You did it, she said, her voice raspy from sleep. You lasted 2 nights. He sat up, rubbing the back of his neck. I did, he said. So does that mean? She propped herself on her elbow, looking at him carefully. That means I should keep my promise and marry you, she said softly. But there is something I need to tell you first. Alexander's heart skipped a beat. What? Ava hesitated, her hands fidgeting in the sheets. I meant what I said. I will marry you if you don't touch me for 2 nights. But I never told you the real reason behind this test. It wasn't just because someone broke my heart before. It was because I wanted to see if you were capable of true commitment. If you could resist me, it meant you had the strength to take a relationship seriously. I know it sounds strange, but for me, it's a symbol of loyalty. I needed to see if you could value me as a person, not just a body. Alexander listened intently, his expression a mix of curiosity and understanding. And? Did I pass? She smiled. Yes, you did. But there's something else. I don't want you to feel forced to marry me just because we had an agreement. If you want to back out now, I'll understand. He reached out and gently took her hand, for the first time initiating contact. It felt momentous and tender. I don't want to back out, he said, his voice firm. I've learned something these past 2 nights. I've learned that I want more than just a physical fling. I want a partner who sees me for who I am, not just my bank account. And I think you might be that person. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she laughed softly. I can't believe this is happening. Alexander squeezed her hand. Believe it, he said gently. But are you sure you want to marry a man like me? I've got a reputation, and you know about my past. Ava pressed her lips together, her eyes bright with emotion. People can change, she said. I've changed too. If you want to try, I'm willing to try as well. He nodded, feeling a strange warmth in his chest. Then let's do it. Let's get married. They did not rush off to a courthouse immediately, nor did they plan a huge wedding that same day. Instead, they spent the morning talking about their future. They discussed what marriage would mean for them: honesty, loyalty, and effort. They talked about the possibility of traveling together, supporting each other's careers, and finding ways to build a real relationship. Alexander felt a calm sense of fulfillment. He had always thought love was a weak concept, something that only broke people's hearts. But sitting with Ava, talking about life in a simple yet real way, made him realize how shallow his life had been. He wanted more than fancy cars and business deals. He wanted someone to share his mornings, his coffee, his secrets, and his fears. He wanted Ava. A week later, They went to a quiet little garden attached to a historic City Hall building. Ava wore a simple white dress that flowed in the breeze, and Alexander wore a tailored suit. Only a handful of close friends witnessed their vows. It was not a grand occasion. No media, no paparazzi. Just a moment of truth between two people who had discovered each other through an odd but meaningful challenge. They exchanged rings, looking into each other's eyes with a sense of awe and promise. When the official pronounced them husband and wife, Ava smiled, tears brimming. Alexander, the man who had once been known as a womanizer, leaned forward and kissed her. This time, it was not forced by desire or the heat of the moment. It was a seal of their bond, tender and honest. The kiss tasted like hope and new beginnings. Still, life was not perfect. They had to learn to trust each other day by day. Ava often felt insecure, worried that Alexander might revert to his old ways when tempted by the world of business parties and glamorous events. Alexander, in turn, had to navigate his pride and the changes that came with letting another person into his daily routine. They argued at times, sometimes over small things, sometimes over deeper issues. But each time, they remembered why they had chosen each other. They remembered the promise that had sparked it all. If you do not touch me, I will marry you. The memory of those 2 nights served as a testament to the fact that they both were capable of patience, respect, and longing without surrendering to impulsive desire. It also reminded them of the strange, twisting road that had led them here. They did not let go of that lesson easily. Whenever they hit a rough patch, they would look into each other's eyes and remember how it felt to lie side by side without crossing that delicate boundary. It was not just a bet. It was the foundation on which they built their bond. A few months after their quiet wedding, Alexander took Ava on a surprise trip to a small island resort. It was private, with clear turquoise waters and soft white sand. He arranged it so they could have an entire stretch of beach to themselves. As they walked along the shore, hand in hand, they spoke their dreams. Ava confessed she wanted to open a small library or bookstore someday, a place where people could come for comfort and stories. Alexander, who had once only cared about profits, found himself offering to invest in that dream. But Ava said she wanted to do it together, not just as a business transaction. "I want our life to be a shared adventure," she told him, her bare feet sinking into the warm sand. Not just a merger of assets. He kissed her forehead, feeling more at peace than he ever had. "Agreed," he said softly. They stopped near the water's edge, the gentle waves lapping at their ankles. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Ava turned to look at him. She gently placed her hand on his cheek, the same gesture she had done months ago in his penthouse. He gazed back, remembering the tension of that dance, the way he had nearly given in but hadn't. Now, he could hold her without hesitation. He placed his arms around her waist, pulling her close, and they swayed to the sound of the ocean, creating their own dance in the sand. In that moment, Alexander realized how precious it was to have someone who saw beyond the money and the power. He was no longer just a womanizing CEO. He was a man capable of love and commitment. And Ava was not just a mysterious figure who tested him. She was his partner, the woman who had challenged him to be better, the one who showed him that real strength could be found in restraint, respect, and the willingness to open his heart. The days turned into weeks, and then into months. They built a life that was both ordinary and extraordinary. Ordinary in the sense that they had breakfast together, went grocery shopping, and argued over which movie to watch. Extraordinary in the sense that they knew they had defied the expectations of everyone who doubted them. Their marriage was anchored in a moment of testing, of seduction, and of restraint, a combination that made them appreciate each other in ways they never had with anyone else. Sometimes, late at night, Ava would tease Alexander about the bet. She would say, "You were so close to losing on that second night," with a mischievous grin. He would laugh and feign offense, telling her that he was never truly close to giving in. But both of them knew the truth, that the tension had been real and intense. It had forced him to confront his own desires and decide what mattered more, a fleeting moment of pleasure or the chance at a deeper bond. He had chosen the bond, and he never regretted it. They eventually went public with their marriage, surprising the press. Rumors flew. People guessed that Ava had trapped Alexander for his money, or that he had forced her into a hasty marriage. Neither paid any attention. They knew the truth, and that was enough. Over time, even the skeptical gossip died down, replaced by admiration for the couple who seemed genuinely happy. Finally, one evening, as they sat in the living room after dinner, Ava snuggled against Alexander on the couch. The city lights shimmered outside the window, reminding them of the night they first sat together in his penthouse. She looked up at him, her expression glowing with warmth. "Do you remember how it all started?" she asked quietly. He smiled, drawing her closer. "How could I forget? It was the strangest proposal I ever heard. I will be with you for 2 nights. If you do not touch me, I will marry you." She laughed softly. "I never thought it would actually turn into this." He pressed a kiss to her temple. "And yet here we are, husband and wife." Her gaze turned serious for a moment. "Do you regret any of it?" Alexander shook his head. "Not a single moment," he said. "Because it led me to you." Her eyes filled with tears again, and she buried her face in his chest. He held her tight, knowing that they had found something rare, a love that had been tested from the start, a union born from challenge and trust. The next morning, Ava woke to find a small note on her bedside table. It read, "My dear wife, I've gone out for a short errand. I'll be back before you know it. Yours, Alexander." Smiling, she got out of bed and went about her routine. She thought about how far they had come. The man who once refused any deep connection now left sweet notes, worried about being gone for just a short time. She realized how much people can change when they find the right reason to do so. A few hours later, she heard the elevator ping in their private lobby. Alexander walked in, carrying a bouquet of lilies, the same scent he had first associated with her. Ava's heart melted at the sight. He handed them to her, then kissed her gently. "What's the occasion?" she asked, touched. He shrugged, a playful smile lighting up his face. "I just wanted to bring you flowers. You deserve them every day." She held the lilies close, inhaling their fragrance. "Thank you," she whispered. He leaned in, his voice low. "Thank you," he replied, "for believing in me, for giving me that crazy challenge. It changed my life." They exchanged a tender kiss, one that held more than mere passion. It held gratitude, understanding, and love, emotions that went beyond a physical bond. Ava closed her eyes, letting the warmth of that moment wash over her. She thought back to those tense nights, the quiet hours when she had tried to break his resolve. Now, she was grateful he had resisted, because it proved he valued more than his own impulses. It proved he could choose her for real, not just for a night. Alexander looked into her eyes. "I love you, Mrs. Pierce," he said softly. "I didn't think I'd ever say that to anyone, but I do." She felt tears prick her eyes. "I love you too," she replied. "More than I thought I could." They moved forward in their life, hand in hand, step by step. The vow they made was not just for show, it was a commitment to grow and learn, to face challenges side by side. Whenever doubts crept in, they remembered how it all started. 2 nights of temptation, 2 nights of closeness without crossing the line, 2 nights that taught them the power of patience, respect, and longing. And so, in the end, their story was not just a tale of seduction and restraint. It became a story of transformation. A woman who was once scarred by betrayal found the courage to trust again. A man who once chased fleeting pleasures discovered that true victory came from mastering himself, not from owning everything around him. Together, they built a marriage that was founded on a quiet but profound choice. Each morning, they shared coffee and laughter. Each night, they held each other close, grateful for the bond that had been forged in those uncertain hours. Outside, the city lights sparkled, just as they had on that very first night in the penthouse. But inside, 2 hearts burned brighter, finding light and warmth in each other's company. And so, the suspense that had once loomed over them found its resolution, not in an explosive moment of defeat or surrender, but in the dawning realization that love, real love, could be discovered in the very act of choosing to wait. Some might say their journey was strange, that it started with a bet about self-control. But for Ava and Alexander, it was the perfect test, a way to reveal the truth of who they were. It was also the spark that set off a chain of events leading them to genuine happiness. When they looked back on those nights, they felt a thrill of memory, recalling the way their hearts pounded in the dark, the way their hands trembled with desire they tried to hide. And yet, they did not regret a single moment of it, because in those 2 nights of challenge, they found a lifetime of love. They ended up proving that sometimes the greatest seduction is the one that makes you wait, and the greatest love is the one that stands firm, shining through even the strongest temptations. In the hush of the morning, as Ava and Alexander stood by the window of their penthouse, watching the sun rise over the city, they knew their story was just beginning. The future stretched out before them, full of new tests, triumphs, and adventures. But no matter what came next, they would face it together, hand in hand, heart to heart, guided by a bond that was as real as it was unexpected. They were no longer strangers testing each other. They were partners. They were 2 souls who chose each other, formed by the fires of a very unusual promise. I will be with you for 2 nights. If you do not touch me, I will marry you. And from that promise, they learned that love, once awakened, can be the strongest force of all.